You saw some of this that I'm going to be talking about in the video. On Sunday, October 28th, Premier Khrushchev used what they called Radio Moscow to announce that the Soviet Union had agreed to remove the missiles and dismantle the missile bases in Cuba. And you saw that on the video. Kenneth O'Donnell was laying in bed, waking up, and they said it on Radio Moscow. And what happened is Khrushchev got to Radio Moscow, which was the biggest media outlet in Russia, and he announced that the Soviet Union had agreed to remove the missiles and dismantle the missile bases in Cuba. And with that announcement, this Cuban Missile Crisis that we've been talking about now for a long time officially ended. And Kennedy met with his staff, and you saw this. He said, you know, it's been a long 2 weeks, and or whatever. I'd like to thank you all. I think you all did a great job, but I don't think we should be gloating too much. It was just as much a victory for them as it was for us. Did you notice the movie? Which person in the movie acknowledged that maybe more than anyone when he said it? It was Adlai Stevenson. Very good. Here. I mean, he was the one. If you think about that, he was the one that had the plan that everybody thought was the wrong answer early in the crisis, if you think about that. Well, President Kennedy then excused himself to his office, where he dictated a letter to Rudolph Anderson's mother and father. Now, a dictaphone, in those days you saw President Kennedy talking into that, and it went into an earpiece of Evelyn Lincoln, who was his personal secretary, and then she typed it as he was saying. So those were very, very famous. Matter of fact, the dictaphone is going to be used to broadcast the swearing in of Lyndon Johnson on Air Force One after the president's assassination. Very common way to get things out at the time. Well, Kenneth O'Donnell was reading something in his office, or was it his office, and he picked up a paperweight from the desk, and it said on the quote, "O God, thy sea is so great, and my boat is so small." Think about that again. "O God, thy sea is so great, and my boat is so small."
How do you know that he did that? Was somebody recording everything that was going on?
This was a big time in history, and people did keep track. And Evelyn Lincoln kept track of a lot of things at that time. Yeah. Now, whose desk was that paperweight on that he picked up? Why?
Yeah.
How do you know that? You're right, but how do you know
that?
What's that? And the coconut was there. Did you see the coconut? So very good. It was actually, he was in the Oval Office, and he picked it up off of Kennedy's desk. And it kind of really sums up the whole crisis. "Oh God, thy sea is so great, and my boat is so small." All the people that were involved on both sides of the Cuban Missile Crisis may have felt that was an appropriate quote. Now, I'm going to go to a new subtopic here. The results of the Cuban Missile Crisis for the United States. Why the end result of the Cuban Missile Crisis was very important to the United States. So basically, I'm just going to tell you 3 reasons why the end result of the Cuban Missile Crisis was so important for the United States at this time in history. Anybody want to guess what one of the important reasons why the way it came out was good for us, considering what we've talked about? It's not that difficult. Well, yeah, that was important, but that's maybe an overview. Go get a little bit maybe more specific. Why was this important to us? What had happened before that was just a disaster? Bay of Pigs. The first thing it did is it more than made up for the disaster of the Bay of Pigs. This bold action on the part of President Kennedy in the minds of American citizens made up for that disaster. They did not see him as a young, inexperienced president who maybe it was a mistake got elected. They saw a man that took bold action, very courageous action under tremendous pressure to keep this country out of World War III. So again, the first important thing was in the minds of American citizens, the bold action and courage on the part of President Kennedy made up for the disaster of the Bay of Pigs, and it gave Americans confidence in our president. Okay? What else? What was our feelings towards communism at the time? Did we think we were kind of in a back seat? We were kind of taking a back seat? The second thing was the result of the Cuban Missile Crisis really gave the entire country the uplift we needed against communism. We weren't really sure that we could stand up to the communists. I mean, they were beating us in the race for space and science and math. People were thinking we were lagging behind. especially after the Bay of Pigs where we had that disaster. So the result of the crisis really gave the entire country the uplift it needed toward communism. And the third thing kind of ties in, the result of the Cuban Missile Crisis really showed citizens that the United States could stand toe-to-toe with the Soviet Union and communism, that we weren't going to be bullied, so to speak, by the communist country. So, again, the end result of the Cuban Missile Crisis was very important for the United States for three reasons. One, in the minds of American citizens, the bold and courageous action on the part of President Kennedy made up for the disaster of the Bay of Pigs, gave the American people more confidence in our real president. Two, the result of the crisis gave the entire country the uplift it needed against communism. And three, the result showed citizens of the United States that we could stand toe-to-toe with the Soviet Union and communism. Now, according to historians, President Kennedy's handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis was the greatest example of crisis management in the history of our country. It was the greatest example of crisis management in the history of the United States. What other crisis happened in which maybe crisis management had to be taken in recent history? 9/11. And President George W. Bush had a crisis to deal with then. And so there's maybe a more modern example. But even with that said, historians will tell you to today that his handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis was the greatest crisis management we've ever had in this country. Okay, what I want to do now is we're on the same subtopic, but I want to talk to you about a famous speech that Kennedy made. And you heard part of it at the end of that video, and I'm going to show you the rest. On June 10th, 1963, June 10th, 1963. No, it's just we're going to continue on here. On June 10th, 1963, and this is just a little over 5 months before his tragic assassination, President Kennedy gave a famous speech entitled the Peace Speech at American University in Washington, D.C. Again, I'll repeat that. On June 10th, 1963, just a little over 5 months before he was tragically assassinated, President Kennedy gave a very famous speech entitled his Peace Speech at American University, which was located in Washington, D.C. And the purpose of his peace speech was to try to change American attitudes towards the Soviet Union and not make it this. You know what I mean? That we had to work together a little bit. And I'm just going to read a few quotes that are of very importance. These are the most memorable quotes from the speech, and you'll get a chance to hear some of them. And we'll see, you've seen this character of President Kennedy during the course of this 13-day movie. This will show you President Kennedy at American University. But think about some of the things he's saying here. First of all, he makes a quote. He says, "What kind of peace do we seek? I'm talking about genuine peace. The kind of peace that makes this life on earth worth living. Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time." He's trying to work together with the Soviets. And he says, "Our problems are man-made. Therefore, they can be solved by man. So let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interests, and by the means in which those differences can be resolved. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity." And probably the most famous quote from that 20-minute speech was when he said, "For in the final analysis, our most basic common link," that's between countries, "is that we all inhabit this small planet, we all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal." And his point is, if we don't work together, what difference does it make? This, for the first time and only time in American history to this date, a Soviet newspaper covered an American president's speech. And the newspaper was called the Pravda, which was the most influential newspaper in the Soviet Union. So then, for the first and only time in our history, a speech by an American president was covered on a complete page of the Soviet newspaper. It's called the Pravda. And that's really saying something, that we've only had one speech that was covered in a newspaper in the Soviet Union, and that was the one that Kennedy gave at American University. So we'll take a little break from lecture, and then we're going to watch parts of this speech for a few minutes, and then we'll tell you why in the world, it's got to be a question in your mind, why in the world did the Soviet Union stick those missiles in Cuba in the first place? What was their motivation for that? Okay? So, we'll watch this speech and then we'll lecture some more. Okay, Will, if you would not mind hitting the lights, please. This will give you a very good indication of what the president looked like, and what he meant. This was a very, very good speech, all about our relations with the Soviet Union.
Basic common link. But let us also direct attention to us and its allies, and even the most high, only those treaty obligations which are in their own interest. So let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interests and the means by which those differences can be resolved. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures, and we are all mortal. Third, let us re-examine our attitude towards the Cold War, remembering we're not engaged in a debate, seeking to pile up debating points. We are not here distributing blame or pointing the finger of judgment. We must deal with the world as it is, and not as it might have been, had the history of the last 18 years been different. We must therefore persevere in the search for peace, in the hope that constructive changes within the communist bloc might bring within reach solutions which now seem beyond us. We must conduct our affairs in such a way that it becomes in the communist interest to agree on a genuine peace, and above all, while defending our own vital interests. Nuclear powers must avert those confrontations which bring an adversary to a choice of either a humiliating retreat or a nuclear war. To adopt that kind of course in the nuclear age would be evidence only of the bankruptcy of our policy or of a collective death wish for the world. To secure these ends, America's weapons are non-provocative, carefully controlled, designed to deter, and capable of selective use. Our military forces are committed to peace and disciplined in self-restraint. Our diplomats are instructed to avoid unnecessary irritants and purely rhetorical hostility, for we can seek a relaxation of tensions without relaxing our guard. And for our part, we do not need to use threats to prove we are resolute. We do not need to jam foreign broadcasts out of fear our faith will be eroded. We are unwilling to impose our system on any unwilling people, but we are willing and able to engage in peaceful competition with any people on earth. Meanwhile, we seek to strengthen the United Nations to help solve its financial problems, to make it a more effective instrument for peace, to develop it into a genuine world security system, a system capable of resolving disputes on the basis of law, of ensuring the security of the large and the small, and of creating conditions under which arms can finally be abolished. At the same time, we seek to keep peace inside the non-communist world, where many nations, all of them our friends, are divided over issues which weaken Western unity, which invite communist intervention, or which threaten to erupt into war. Our efforts in West New Guinea, in the Congo, in the Middle East, and the Indian subcontinent have been persistent and patient, despite criticism from both sides. We have also tried to set an example for others by seeking to adjust small but significant differences with our own closest neighbors in Mexico and Canada. Speaking of other nations, I wish to make one point clear. We are bound to many nations by alliances. These alliances exist because our concern and theirs substantially overlap. Our commitment to defend Western Europe and West Berlin, for example, stands undiminished because of the identity of our vital interests. The United States will make no deal with the Soviet Union at the expense of other nations and other peoples, not merely because they are our partners, but also because their interests and ours converge. Our interests converge, however, not only in defending the frontiers of freedom, but in pursuing the paths of peace. It is our hope and the purpose of Allied policy to convince the Soviet Union that she too should let each nation choose its own future, so long as that choice does not interfere with the choices of others.
Okay, let me ask you a question. When he was talking about Berlin, he was making it clear that we would not what? Make any deals. And that was Kenneth O'Donnell's concern, that if we make this deal, they're going to be trade after trade after trade, and pretty soon they're going to force us into trading something that we won't trade, and that would be Berlin. That was his point. So the president made it clear there that they are not trading any people's freedom out, and kind of covering himself for the decision that was made to trade the missiles in Turkey for the missiles in Cuba. Okay? All right, well, we'll continue on here and explain to you why in the world the Soviet Union placed missiles in Cuba in the first place. And so I got to go back before the crisis to April of 1962. This is why the Soviet, do I have a
Final note?
Fine, still under final notes, yeah. Why did the Soviet Union place missiles in Cuba? And I got to go back to April of 1962. And what happened in April of 1962 is Premier Khrushchev and one of his generals were walking along the beach of the Black Sea in Russia looking towards Turkey. Okay? So Khrushchev and one of his generals in April of 1962 were walking along the beaches of the Black Sea in Russia, looking across the Black Sea at the country of Turkey. And Khrushchev and this particular general were discussing the American missiles that they knew were located in nearby Turkey. This was in April of 1962. Again, the crisis is in October. So the general and Khrushchev are discussing, gee, you know what? I don't know about those American missiles that are located right over there in Turkey. And Khrushchev began to realize that the United States was surrounding the Soviet Union with nuclear weapons. He realized that, oh, gee whiz, we're getting, kind of caught with our pants down. Now, at this time in history, the United States had approximately 5,000 missiles compared to only 300 that the Russian had in their military. So we're up like 5,000 nuclear missiles to 300. So we were vastly in a higher capacity of missiles than they were. And, Premier Khrushchev kind of studied the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, and he knew that the Americans had some intentions upon Cuba. Just like Kenneth O'Donnell said, let's bomb the blank out of them. We want to. We've been trying to free Cuban rule of Fidel Castro since the Eisenhower administration. So Khrushchev knew we had intentions on Cuba. And so he wanted to use Cuba with the same intention as we were using what? Turkey. Get some missiles close to our enemy. That's where this whole idea came up. So Khrushchev decided he was going to use Cuba with the same intention that the United States was using in Turkey. It makes sense why he would do that, okay? So in May of 1962, again months before the crisis, in May of 1962, Cuban officials and Russian officials got together and discussed the probability of putting some nuclear weapons in Cuba. And who was representing the Cuban government? Fidel Castro. This meeting went several days, and in the end, Castro agreed to allow the missiles to be placed in his country. So they just didn't do it. They actually met and discussed it. And Castro said, that's great. Go ahead, we'll take some in our country.
So is Turkey the only place we have missiles from striking this?
That close. I mean, we have missiles in Great Falls, Montana that could hit Russia, you know, but that was the closest missiles we had, yeah. And very, very well known that they were that close. Closer they are, less time it takes to get there, okay, so.
It was almost more of a victory for Russia because they accomplished their goal.
It might have been. Yeah, I've had kids say that. Very good. Well, because of Castro's agreement to allow missiles into Cuba, the Soviet operation of placing nuclear missiles in Cuba would have a code name. It would be called Anadar. Anadar. And it was named after a Siberian city. So the code name, the military code name for placing Russian missiles in Cuba was called Anadar. And this whole thing started in July of 1962. And in July of 1962, 85 Soviet ships left Russia heading for Cuba in July of 62. Now, I know you got questions, but wait till you hear the story. Okay, what did these 85 Soviet ships carry to Cuba in July of 1962? Russian soldiers, 60 nuclear missiles, 60. Also carried fighter jets and military trucks. So in July of 1962, 85 Soviet ships left Russia, carrying out this mission called Anadar, with Russian soldiers, 60 nuclear weapons or missiles, fighter jets, and military trucks. And I know what Nick's thinking, well, why didn't they figure out till October what was going on, right? Well, matter of fact, once these Russian ships entered Caribbean waters, or waters of the Caribbean,